So welcome to the Big Muddy Speaker Series. Tonight we have the Blue River Society and the Blue River Road Investigators. A little bit different than what we've been doing in the last few months, but basically we're talking art using the Blue River and Blue River Road. Art these days is not a picture on the wall necessarily, but more an experience. And that's about all I'm going to tell you about it. I will let our presenters go from there, but tonight we have what it looks like 3-4 different presenters. I don't know everybody's qualifications. We got Andy Ozer as an illustrator. Emily, I'm not even sure. Booker. And Trey Hawk with the Art Institute as assistant professor of filmmaking, and Brent Jackson, Johnson County Community College, adjunct
I like
professor.
adjunct better, but
An adverb professor from of English,
there we go.
Johnson County Community College. So I will give you to our presenters.
Thanks for having us tonight. Nice to see some familiar faces as well as some unfamiliar faces. My name is Andy Ozier, as Larry said. I'm one of the co-founders of the Blue River Society. Unfortunately, our other co-founder, Graham, could not be here because he is getting his tonsils chopped off today. So we do have Emily Wilker, who's a member of the Blue River Society, who's going to speak about her involvement with the Blue River Society as well as the project that she's working on. So the Blue River Society is essentially a group of artists working together, making work about the Blue River, and our mission is to use an array of perspectives to increase the communal awareness of the river. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Blue River, it is about a 40-mile long river that starts in Johnson County, the confluence of the Wolf Creek and the Coffee Creek. And from there, it kind of weaves in and out of the states of Kansas and Missouri, kind of sewing it together in a way. And it runs northeast and flows all the way into the Missouri River. Some of the major tributaries are Tomahawk Creek, Indian Creek, and Brush Creek. A little bit about my background. Excuse me. So I grew up in the state of Kansas, and we had a creek in my backyard, so I was always kind of fascinated with getting dirty and catching crawfish and those sorts of things. And I went to school in Overland Park, and it's kind of funny that my high school wasn't even 3 miles from where the river begins, but I was completely unaware of it, but that seems to kind of be a major theme of the river, just kind of public perception, public awareness of it. Fast forwarding a few years, I moved to the Missouri side to study illustration at the Kansas City Art Institute. And a little bit about how I first found out about the river. A good friend of mine would take me to some spots in sort of the industrial areas of the Blue River, so I didn't really have a great first impression. From there, I kind of became a little curious, and after looking at some Google Maps for a little bit, I realized that there was so much more of this river that I'd never seen before, and I was kind of curious about the potential that it could have. So our next step was to get a boat, which we got for free. It's not the coolest boat, but it floats, and like I said, it was free. This is a picture from the maiden voyage back in the summer of 2016. We've since invested in some legitimate paddles. That was a paddle we crafted out of a broomstick and a piece of plywood. So it was about this time that I was kind of getting back into fishing, which is something I was interested in when I was younger. So kind of the boating and the fishing started to go hand in hand. So after we took a few trips along the river, we realized how much it really had going for it and how much of a resource this is to the community. There's quite a few parks and trails along the river, and we've ran into many people along the way who also interact with the river in a lot of ways. There's, for example, there's mountain bike trails and hiking trails. Great place to fish, as I've talked about a couple times already. So early on rather, it was interesting to kind of meet these people and find out sort of what drew them to the river. I'm going to switch gears and let Emily tell you a little bit about herself.
Yes, thank you, Andy. So I'm going to introduce myself and then we're going to go back to Andy, but I just wanted to start out with a little brief history on myself. So I'm from Springfield, Missouri, and I moved up here about 10 years ago, roughly, to go to the Kansas City Art Institute. We're same class, 2013. And so, yeah, similar to Andy, I grew up, canoeing and kayaking and camping and always being a part of the nature scene down in the Ozarks. And so that being a relevance, we definitely have bonded over that. Originally from the Ozarks, I gravitated towards the James and the Niagara. And so to give you a bit of a reference, not that we don't know our state of Missouri, but I grew up down in Greene County. You can see the James there with the Niagara. And then often I would also go with my family over to the Current River, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but that's really beautiful terrain. It starts out as a normal river and then it ends up being spring-fed. And so that's me, canoeing on that current. Just beautiful. So anyways, and so fast forward a little bit into my studies at KCAI. I was in the painting department, graduated in 2013, and I decided to move here because I thought it was a nice stepping stone out of the Ozarks to pursue my art career, and KCAI was a perfect fit for me. Here's an example of one of my student works, which in hindsight, and this is a terrible picture, I can tell you that, but it's the only one I have. But even back then, I was working in a sketchbook and I was going out and painting and referencing and working in the landscape. And so that was crucial to me even back then. And so looking at it now with the practice that I'm doing with you guys on the Blue River, it's quite relevant. And so in that, having really fast drying materials and working in an immediate pace, and being able to make something and then leave has always been an important thing in my studio practice. So here's our buddy Graham, other co-founder of the Blue River Society. And so it wasn't until after graduation that I sanely didn't really know about the Blue River. I've been here for quite a while. I've definitely explored Swope Park and all those things, but I hadn't found the Blue River until about a year ago. And so among hiking and hanging out with Andy and Graham down there, I began painting in plein air. I was encouraged to go paint on the Blue River, and that's where you guys were working on your, kind of starting your zine stuff. So I'm gonna let you explain that a bit.
So after our boat trips and spending a little bit more time on the river, we sort of formed the Blue River Society. And our first project was we were featured tablers at the Kansas City Zine Con. And for those of you who might not know what a zine is, it's a small self-published magazine, periodical, whatnot. So, we had the name, we're off to a good start. So we want to do a little bit of research to kind of find out a little bit more about the river, its history, where we come into play. So here, I'm going to talk about a couple of the publications we made for the Zine Con. This was called Faces of the Blue, and this kind of highlights historical figures as well as Kansas City celebrities. And here we have a picture of Danny Boatwright. for those of you who don't know who Danny Boatwright is, she was on Survivor season 11 and took home $1 million, so she's kind of like Kansas City's sweetheart. In my opinion, anyways. Moving on, this is one I made. Sorry, let me backtrack real quick. I forgot to mention, kind of in the spirit of collaboration on that last scene, we had 9 different artists, each create one of these portraits. And this was by Selena Curry, who's in the crowd tonight. All right, now we'll move forward. So this one was by me. I titled it Big Blue KC Select Illustrated Happenings 2016 through 2017. And this one, I basically just took pages out of sketchbooks and kind of edited them, altered them a little bit. That's kind of a big part of my practice and my involvement with the river. I always go with a notebook, and from there I kind of take that back to the studio and be able to reflect on it, make work. This was by our friend Graham. It was titled On Hollowed Ground, and this is specifically about the Blue Banks neighborhood, which is around 63rd Street and Hardesty area. It's kind of like an industrial area that's, it's not the most beautiful place, but it has a lot of history. There was a Civil War battle leading up to the Battle of Westport. So he sort of made this photo essay of that area, and that's an area that we kind of gravitate towards quite a bit, a place that we've been pretty familiar with for the most part. And I'm going to talk about fishing again, because why not? This is a little guide I made called Fishing on the Blue River, and for this publication, I reached out to the Missouri Department of Conservation and requested a species list, and we were surprised to find out that there were approximately 38 species that were sampled from the river, but the last time that I believe they sampled was maybe in the mid-'80s. So it's kind of interesting. We've seen people catch fish that weren't included on this list, and I'm wondering which of these species might no longer be in the river. I'm thinking maybe it's time for an updated species list. Moving on to our next project. This one was a little bigger, a little bit more ambitious. We hosted a movie screening on the Blue River with 4 different filmmakers. We had a trash cleanup as well as the screening. And this was held at Minor Park, which is over off of Red Bridge, if any of you are familiar with that area. I'm going to show you a little teaser of some of the films we screened that night.
So I got my camera and just started walking around and just seeing pictures. I saw cars that had been like sort of taken.
That water was just running 10, 12 feet above the banks. I mean, it was flooding the first story of many of the buildings right there that we know now.
I think the ones that really scared was the plaza because they got so much investment there. So it was like a traumatic impact, and I think it made them realize they were going to have to do something different with that creek.
There we go. Okay. I got it this time. So if it's colder, it is less effective. I see, because it is a shame, but
Thank you so
that's
much.
how it is. So flick it forward and then you're good to go.
They were building memories by just spending time together, but it was really refreshing, and somehow I feel like these guys were a good influence on me.
Oh, close. Yep.
recording live.
My parents are dinosaurs, your parents are dinosaurs, my parents are dinosaurs, and they roll, 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 and they bark, 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 meow, 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 meow.
How are you wearing two glasses at the same time? Two pairs of glasses.
Because I need, for seeing up close, like for looking at the phone, I need 425 or 450s, but you can't find them in the stores. You have to order them online. It's hard to find them online.
Cyclops.
A Cyclops only has one eye.
Yeah, Cyclops is one eye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So with these films, each of them had ties to kind of a Blue River or kind of community-based ideas about them, and this is kind of something we want to pursue a little bit more in the future. Kind of having some programming or projects that are right there on the river. Moving ahead, in the winter months we started spending a lot less time on the river, and we kind of had a little bit of time to come up with some new projects, and one of them being a group show that we wanted to put together. So we contacted Emily here, our friend Molly Dillon, who's also a plein air painter, Selena, who's a painter, Amy Erickson, who's traditionally a painter. We'll get into that in a minute. Frederick Vorderbergy, Will Toney, and Paige Gordon. I like to call them the dream team because they helped make this whole thing happen. So the dream team got together and wrote a proposal, and hence Watershed was born. This was a group show that we had during the month of August at Volbus Bastille Gallery, which is in the Blue River watershed, so we found that the venue was appropriate. So this show explored an array of perspectives on topics relating to the river. It grew to be, much more of not just a singular vision, but a chorus of expression. And we found that the show was not only intended by the art scene, but we also were able to draw some people from the conservation field. So some artists in the show, like Emily or Selena or Molly, were already kind of making work about the river, and it felt appropriate to contact them and include them in the show. And other people maybe weren't so familiar with the river, so we kind of found this to be a good opportunity to bring them down to the river and get sort of their perspective on it. And a lot of people, since this was sort of a new thing to them, they felt comfortable maybe exploring some new approaches or a little bit of experimentation within their work. This piece was by Selena, and as I talked about a little bit ago, the the Blue Banks battlefield. This was under the 63rd Street Bridge, an area that we frequent. She cobbled together probably about a dozen photographs to make the composition. And this was a gouache and acrylic ink painting, very large in scale, which was kind of outside of her comfort zone, working that large. Our friend Frederick Vorderbergy, he made a series of sculpture paintings, and he kind of had a similar approach to making these works as I do, kind of with the sketchbook. They're kind of diaristic in a way, where he's sort of reflecting on these experiences or these places that he's been to, and he's the guy who kind of showed me around these gritty areas, so his work kind of reflects that a little bit too. And Molly Dillon, who I had mentioned, is into plein air painting, and a couple of her pieces. These were, I believe, around the Red Bridge Park area, Minor Park. Will Toney was one of the artists who wasn't very familiar with the river, so we found this to be a good opportunity to take him to a few different places to kind of feel out what kind of subject matter he wanted to work with, and he then made some large scale photographs. Paige, traditionally a filmmaker, she kind of, in the spirit of filmmaking, she kind of approached it with a narrative route, and she had she made these calendars which kind of tell a story about this relationship between a woman and a carp. Amy Erickson, who's traditionally a painter, like very classically trained, Renaissance. So this was a major departure for her. She made a video and made a little installation around that. And this is work by yours truly. This was a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm not known for realism, so I kind of gave that a little bit of a try. And the fish here are all from the species list, and just kind of wanted to push myself a little bit, and it was painful, but I got through it. And Graham Carroll, also a filmmaker, he made a film that kind of started about cliff swallows, but kind of became a piece about sort of the nature that surrounds the Blue River. And Emily Wilker had some plein air paintings as well as some sculptures, but I am going to pass the mic to her because I think she could probably describe her work a little bit better than I could.
I like to think so. To get to the point of really articulating these sculptures and divulging in that kind of tactile nature, I'm going to take it back a little bit to roughly around a year ago is when I started to go out onto the river. And so that all started, my main hub is Minor Park, Red Bridge, very comfortable there. And I've definitely ventured out a lot onto the Blue River Road and things like that, but that's the spot where I go and I feel very comfortable to be by myself and go paint. And so that started out definitely going out with Graham. So this is just off the bank, kind of like Brady Park if you've ever been out there. There's like a drone field, a tennis court, and then the river. And that's what I love. And so I'm curious though, do many of you know what plein air means? Yeah? Okay, good. Because most people I describe plein air, they're like, what's that? I'm like, well, it's basically what it sounds like. It's in plein air. It's painting in nature. It's resolving or at least sketching out and executing some type of painting or drawing within the landscape that you're already in. And so that's what I was doing, and that's something I've done for years. It's kind of how I started making art back when I was a young kiddo. And it evolved at KCAI, and so once I graduated from the painting department, I definitely struggled with figuring out what kind of content I wanted, what kind of subject matter. Being from the Midwest and being, fairly a realistic painter, I wanted to find something that was relative to myself. And so that was the beginning of a couple paintings. This is Blue River Green, Blue River Red. And so notably, I don't think, there's a huge difference between this and my other work, but I started out working out in acrylic. And that was just kind of natural for me. It's what I had. It was in my suitcase. And then after going out and painting a couple times, I realized this is not working for me. So it was too wet. It wouldn't dry. I couldn't layer. I couldn't do things like that. And so that moving forward, I'm going to kind of skim through the paintings I've been doing in the last year. So these are a couple of my buddies. Definitely the coldest day I've ever gone painting. We lasted about 3 hours. It was 29 degrees. And it was raining too, but I don't know why it wasn't snowing. We had these tarps and we were hanging out. And that's really when I started to use gouache. Something that, obviously has been around for centuries, but I just haven't ever used it. And so I like the ability to layer like you would acrylic, that it allowed it to dry in the time that I was out there. So this is the painting that came from that at Byram's Ford, which Andy was referencing earlier. And so that really opened a can of worms for me, and I was on fire, I would say. And so over the next, and you could just kind of flip, yeah, just a couple paintings here. And I really love the velvety kind of nature of the gouache and the layering and its matte-ness. And so these last two, so if you go back one, so this was a period on the river, I think it's summer 2017. We had a lot of flooding, a lot of flash floods. And I was going out there and realizing like trees and trash were stuck like easily 30 feet above the ground in the trees. And so that really gave you an idea of what the water levels were at that time. And that really, in that moment, made me realize the kind of trash and debris and things that were floating on the river and polluting other spaces that are from miles away. Who knows where they came from? So I started to do paintings about that. And so Post-Flood and Ford are both that kind of washing over of water and the flattening and that kind of impression that flooding did. Moving forward, I started to find myself moving outside of that kind of traditional composition and focusing more on what did I want to get out of this going and painting all the time. Like it came naturally to me, it felt really good, but I wanted to do more than just paint. I wanted it to be something that would then feed another part of my studio practice or something that I'd been working on before. And so this one kind of broke out for me in being focusing on the impression of humankind in the landscape and how like the beaten path isn't, it's not a given path, it's not carved out for anyone, it's just there because people have been there. And so that, along with the post, kind of ignited that for me. Along with painting, I was also taking pictures and kind of archiving as much as I could, and I always found myself photographing the things that seemed a little bit juxtaposed and a little uncomfortable, and trash, lots of trash. And well, I used to go out and I'd pick up trash and then I'd paint. But then this time, I'd go out and I'd sit and I'd paint and then I'd pick up the trash. So I found myself finding areas on the river that were more polluted because I knew at the end I would want to pick up the trash. And that kind of started to drive the subject matter without me even necessarily being conscious of it. Flag tree removed. So this is the first painting I decided to break away from the horizontal picture plane and work vertically. And I think it was a really productive move. So it's moments like this where you can tell that somebody's been there recently. I'm really enticed by. And so this one in particular, I painted and I went back the next day to finish it because I really like the kind of like time constraints of having to be in plein air. And so when I went back the next day to finish it, the tree had been cut down. So yeah, and so this one, it's interesting. So that's a tire wrapped into the landscape. I get a lot of, people think it's like an eel or a snake or like a weird wildlife thing. But I was just obsessed with this tire, and I'm working on making a sculpture out of it. But it helped me focus on the objectness and how these displaced relics or trash or things are informing everything around them. And so I've kind of started to create these kind of vignettes of the landscape and the subject matter being primarily about trash and residue and things that are inherently going to be there. Even if you pick them up, they're going to be there again tomorrow. Another example is someone spending time here, and it's more through less about litter and trash and more about the residue and mark of somebody taking the time to make a statement as they would. And I like that kind of juxtaposition too of the applied color, that kind of cosmetic color on the exterior of the structure along with the fall tones. yeah, so I kind of moved away from that kind of foreground, middle ground, and background and working in the landscape and really just focusing on the objects that I found on the river. So signage and packaging really became a large part of my practice. And so similar to what Andy was saying, you know, the winter months came and didn't really want to spend much time on the river. So I moved most of everything into my studio. I was like, well, what can I do in my other parallel practice of doing kind of sculptural work? And so I started constructing objects by referencing my paintings. And so this is where this kind of came about. Broken Coca-Cola can. The thank you bag is, so it's poured on plastic and then peeled off. So it's basically what it's mimicking, it's just plastic. Same with these. So I haven't quite gotten to a conclusion, but I definitely like to be local, like Sunfresh, like this Sunfresh circular coupon. I love representing Boulevard and just because that's what is out there. That's what you see when you're on the river. It's just garbage, but it's what we are disregarding and putting out there. And so I made the Sunfresh circular, which is definitely an ode to our years living in Midtown. And then to the right there, so that's acrylic pours. So I was using 6-foot by 3-foot tables, because that's what I had. I pour any type of oops paint I could get from the rehab place. Do you want to talk about it? Yeah, Restore. And to pour it, let it dry. And so I had about 6 of those, stacked them on top of one another, rolled it like a Swiss roll, and then used a steak knife, and literally cut them apart, because that's just what I had on hand. And so I started to make these objects that were in reference to my paintings, but I wasn't really sure quite how they were going, what they were going to do, but they were a lot of fun. And so even though we had been hanging out, and I've been hanging out with Graham and the Blue River Society, we had never really quite collaborated. And so hearing about Watershed and that proposal going through at the gallery that I have a studio at, it was really exciting. It definitely lit a match underneath me to make these sculptures that are in representation and in kind of this digestion of the paintings that I've been working on. And so here on the left, I have a hollowed out log that I've been working on. It's made out of chicken wire, plaster strips, paint, and I basically plastered it to my table. And then once it dried, I just kicked it off. Functioned like a hollowed out log. And then clearly, so me being a painter and not traditionally a sculptor, I just made molds out of what the things were. So I used a beer bottle, I used cans, I used those things to then make the representation of themselves. And that just seemed natural to me. Moving forward, so there's those logs again. That's kind of the beginnings of what I call fire pit. It's funny because it just looks so heavy, the original product, but it's just all foam and just take a nap on it. And then on the right there, I'm constructing a tree branch as well out of wire, plaster strips, and acrylic medium. And so that branch then gets folded up into the Sunfresh ad, and I wanted to articulate this kind of. It's interesting working in sculptural ways because everything is so decided, but to make it look kind of effortless and be what it's representing, but inherently it won't be. And so that was kind of an interesting challenge for me. In the right there, I made a snake skin. I hate snakes, and so every time I go to the river, I always encounter one, whether it's dead or alive, it doesn't matter, they're always there. So it's just gonna follow me. And so moving forward, this is a finished product of Fire Pit. It's constructed out of the foam that I was talking about, the rolled up logs and the broken pieces. I did paint peeled condom wrappers and newspaper and whatever, and just put it in there like you would, because that's what you find on the river. You're like, damn, what happened here last night? And so that's kind of what I was wanting to represent. So that was one of 3. Number 2 is Finders Keepers. And so this initially I kind of wanted to make a sculpture for every season because I'm such a Midwestern and I love that. But with time constraints and I didn't want to be restricted by that being like my thing. And so I ended up making 3 instead of 4. And so this is definitely a representation for me of springtime and just things you'd find, kind of that vignette that I try to do in my paintings. I was trying to see how that would translate into sculpture. It's a very naive project for me, but very exciting and fun. And last but not least, this is Thank You Sunfresh. The hollowed out log. The base is mostly foam with poured paint, and it also has that Sunfresh ad mixed up and then a thank you bag. And it's these kind of collaborative efforts, not just between my painting practice and my sculpture practice, but the intervention of working with Graham and Andy and then all these other peers at Watershed is really what made these happen. I wouldn't have had that kind of drive or a kind of focused in subject unless we had that happening. So that's my spiel.
So, moving forward, here's a list. Here's a list of some people who are also involved with the Blue River or sort of conservation in the area. A lot of people we've not touched base with, but we would hope to in the future. From here on out, that's kind of our mission, to work with people, because it's not just the art freaks or the conservation nerds. They have to work together in order to kind of make it accessible to more people. So that's about all I got.
Oh, and I'm Casey Plein. I forgot to say that. Follow me on Instagram.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Trey Hawk. I teach in the Converging Media Department at Kansas City Art Institute. My practice is, it incorporates a lot of stuff: filmmaking, printed materials, photography, performance, installation, and then this is my brother in arms. Brett and I have known each other for since we were 6 years old, something like that. 7?
6 or 7.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I also work at the Kansas City Art Institute, teaching 1 class, and I teach 3 classes in English at Johnson County Community College.
Make the mic
do we need the mic?
Oh, do we need to actually have the mic?
Okay,
All right.
sorry about that.
We'll start passing it back and forth.
Okay, and so I'm also a painter and a printmaker, and I write, and sort of the region, Kansas, Missouri, and the Midwest in general, is a general focus as far as what I'm concerned with, sort of always have been. And so Trey and I saw the open submissions for Open Spaces, Kansas City, and we saw that Swope Park was the center where they were wanting to do things. And just prior to that point, we had made an exchange about Blue River Road, which is a space that we had explored as teenagers, and we discovered for the first time that Blue River Road was closed. And this became very intriguing to us. We were concerned why, or what did it mean? And it was just a sort of a strange situation. And so we submitted, we thought like, well,
in high school we used to travel the road because it was this just complicated, fascinating space. It's a road that follows a river, which one is just weird for a road. Most roads are built as sort of along a grid system that sort of just runs, regardless of the landscape around them, in these sort of linear paths. And here's this roadway that's windy, has these quick curves. Most of you will know that, because it's 40 miles an hour along the roadway, it's pretty dangerous at times. It's also completely encased in the Blue River Parkway, so it's all the whole old-growth hardwood forest. It's just an interesting space, and we were in high school in the late 80s and early 90s, so we would drive along it. It felt secluded, it felt wooded, we would tell each other tales of ghostly firefighters who would wander the area, and also because of the sort of contentious neighborhood layouts of the sort of city planning of Kansas City, it just had this mystique to it. It felt weirdly otherworldly within the nature of the city. And so, but Brent and I kind of moved on with our lives, and Brent had a family, I got married and had a job, and we just had kind of forgotten about Blue River Road by the time we came back. And so, unbeknownst to each other, 2 weeks apart, we had both been out there and seen the road closure. And that's when Brent called me and was just like, have you been on Blue River Road? And I was like, yeah, man. In fact, just 2 weeks ago I was there. I was like, it's closed. I was like, I know. And so we knew we wanted to do a project, and that's the timing of when the open spaces call kind of showed up.
In the beginning, we had no idea why the road was closed. We started doing research, and we both have backgrounds in sort of academic research and whatnot, and so we started looking at it. But the thing about Blue River Road was, the more we studied it, the weirder the story became. It's like, okay, there's some sort of flash flood, but somehow the flash flood washed the road away, but why do you then just throw up barricades and let it sit for 8 years? Who's behind this? What does it mean? And so more and more it seemed to be the kind of space where contemporary art might be a way of approaching it, because our argument became that obviously science had failed the road, engineering had failed the road, municipal and county government, and now we've even learned federal government failed the road. So why not approach it by art, right? Because basically what contemporary art does is it allows us the opportunity to look at things in different ways. Again, so it's not just something, an object, hung on a wall, but it's a way of going out and encountering space with different visions. So we began in our submission to start traveling the road, particularly this one space that we designated as the annex. And as we started, we thought we were going to be more like law enforcement. But then as we moved on, it became more that we were actually like our own National Park Service or Department of Interior. And as our practice progressed, and as we started looking at things and started examining things, we thought that that was what we should be. We should essentially be our own private government agency. And as we started doing that, we started also thinking of what does a government agency do? What does a Parks and Rec do? What does the Department of Interior do? Well, what it does is it privileges a space, right? That space may either be cultural or historical or natural, and it basically locks that space off. Well, what we have at Blue River Road, particularly in the annex section, is we suddenly have a space that is blocked off not because of intention, but because of accident. And so rather than looking at that as a mistake, we said no, this is intentional. We will now make this our own little national park.
And in the proposal we submitted, this is a short video, and we'll see if we can get it to play, but to me this epitomizes the sort of just kind of, electric weirdness of the space. Let's see if we can, here it goes. Oh. And because it just feels like you're in the middle of nowhere, and then as the camera turns to kind of follow this possum, which just seems to be crossing a roadway, you get the barricade in the background, and you can hear the sound of the urban environment around. If we were away from the barricade, it'd feel like we were in unincorporated land in northern Arkansas. It just could be kind of anywhere. And it was just so fascinating to me. So Brent actually wrote a document in sort of preparation for kind of building the proposal, because we were both thinking in sort of these mythic structures. The ideas of a mythic municipal organization is so weird, but so is the space. And so I'll just read this real quick. For 8 years, the road has ceased to be a road in a traditional sense. Though there's evidence of human travel across the road's surface throughout the closed section, there are now 2 termini, one south and one north, and though designed as a barrier, these concrete blockages have created an interzone where new usages are possible. Without automotive traffic, the closed road has become a new kind of space. Excerpt from Blue River Road Investigation, primary document, undated. And so Brent writes this and sends it to me, and I was like, great, okay, we're making an organization. And so then this is a little description that I wrote, which is just that Blue River Road Investigators cross-disciplinary artwork created by artists Brent Jackson and Trey Hawk for Open Spaces 2018. Its goal is to highlight the beauty and complexity of undervalued space, 10-mile stretch of Blue River Road in Kansas City, Missouri. The work includes performance, installation, a variety of interactive elements such as tours and programming. Blue River Road Investigators explores how humans interact with and value the space around them and the needs that drive those interactions. So it became about exploring the usage of space around us, which excited me because that means we needed uniforms.
And the uniforms were critical and were part of the original design, because when I first went to Blue River Road, I was with my 7-year-old son, and I came at sort of dusk and came to the park where the barrier was, and it depends what happens when you come to that park. You will see different things every time. Like last time I was there, which is just about a week ago, there was a bow hunter and people walking their dogs. But other times you will see what we would say is perhaps commercial exchanges of differing natures at the park and differing individuals. And one of the things I came up with very early is like, we got to get some uniforms so we don't get shot. Because we figured that if we went out and looked like we worked for the city, people would leave us alone. And so as a result of that, part of our practice and our performance, we said like, okay, we got to gear up, we got to get high visibility, and people just think we're official. And it's amazing. It pretty much worked.
Well, and absolutely. And it's just like, what I found is that even fictitious municipal organizations develop their own bureaucracy. And so we then needed business cards. We had to then do pamphlets and flyers. This is our home office, which was our installation. So that's the open spaces placard there. And we do have to give a shout out to the Lakeside Nature Center. Kimberly Hess was amazing. They were lovely and hosted us. And part of one of the discussions that Brent and I had was the idea that Lakeside is filled with all of these dioramas. The black rat snake, the bald eagle enclosure, the various raptor pens, and things like that. And so my thought as an installation was it needed to kind of reflect the space that it was there, which was hilarious because you literally would go from the black rat snake to the bald eagles. They were right here. They were our office mates. And then you'd go to us, and people would walk right past it like it was just one of the other ones, even though it clearly says Blue River Road Investigators Main Office and the investigation, which is weirdly nonsensical, but it's part of the fact that people could ignore that was so consistent with the fact that people could just ignore the annex. It just really, it meant a lot to me. There's actually a piece of the road that we took from the annex and put on display in the installation.
And one of the things that we kind of noticed as we went on is that many times people hate contemporary art because they're like, oh, it's so weird. And the mistake that someone had with ours is ours seemed to be normal, but wasn't. So our weirdness came from the fact that it looks like it's real, yet it is not. As you can see, this is Trey's sign, which is in authentic brown and white, designating a cultural landmark. And Trey put these up at the south and north entrance of the annex, and these generated a lot of responses from people who were just like, "What is this?" And in many cases, particularly on the south entrance, there are people who go along who were from kind of South Kansas City who wanted the problem of the road solved. Mm-hmm. And instead, encountering performance art, were sometimes dissatisfied because we couldn't really give the answer. When you pave the thing again, it's like, well, that's not really what we're doing.
They wanted a receptacle to put all of their ire and anger over the disuse of the road into. And we were like, no, yeah, you can, sure, talk about that. And they were like, well, but what are you going to do about it? I was like, we're doing it. We're on the road right now. And they were like, I don't get how this solves anything. Is there a solution? And we would just basically confuse them into this weird sort of antagonistic submission. But there was all of this excitement between Brent and I about these signs too, like when to put them out, how far ahead of time to put them out from the opening, like worried that they were getting tagged and shot. And then also totally disappointed that they never got tagged or shot. And feeling like that it wasn't until somebody like dumped trash at the base of one of them that I felt like they'd finally been claimed by the road. Because otherwise they were just these foreign and alien objects. And what we realized is about 2 or 3 tours in, we just realized they looked way too official and that nobody was even going to touch them. And that was part of, I think, the power and the problem of the piece, is that we really became this kind of weird official organization. I mean, Brent likes to point out that there's a mix of sort of public and private funds that funded Open Spaces, the exhibition that this was part of. And so even though we were initially a fictitious municipal organization, because we were in fact, in part, funded by the city, were we? So it was just this question. But the tours kind of kicked off, and I'll show you some photos from that.
So we did 9 tours all total, which may not sound like a lot, but it was a lot. We went out every Saturday from the beginning of Open Spaces till the end, and we had a lot of different people. There were people who were sort of from the community. There were people who saw the signs and responded to that. There were people from Open Spaces. There were some, serious art world types who also showed up. But every time we were enriched. We never were disappointed by the roadway. The road always delivered something. Every time. We also had two-way radios. I was very serious about having two-way radios because I think you can't be official without them. This is a rather significant moment. We had there was a gentleman on our first tour who was camped in the middle of the roadway. So that's pictures from this guy who was living there. And we were very kind of ginger about how we approached it. We just kind of gave a heads up to the people who were with us. It was like, okay, there's somebody sleeping in the middle of the road. There's obviously his shelter, and so we just want to be respectful of that. And we didn't take any pictures, some other people did.
And I did include some of the pictures just because I thought it would be important, just because of the awareness. But that was the other thing, is within the confines of the piece, Brent and I were very neutral about the usage of the road, because just the building of the road in the late 1920s is so weird. The decision to throw up the barricades and leave it for 8 years is weirdly nonsensical and kind of totally Kansas City in its own way. And so how is that, as far as a usage of this space, really that significantly different than the decision to dump a whole bunch of trash around one of the barricades? It seems to be basically consistent with how the human beings who are existing in this space and using this space treat the space. So we had this real neutrality, which I think did bother some people who wanted a sort of hard line one way or the other. And it's not to say that Brent and I as individuals didn't have opinions about how the space should be used, how it should be treated, how it should be cared for. But at least within the confines of the piece, we remained neutral and kind of claimed all activity as valid and an example of the human activity of the space. And so that's what we did, and I thought Brent did actually a masterful job to pull everybody aside and just basically lay claim to the individual's right to be in the roadway. Some trash and pictures. Actually, one of the best vantage points to see the river from the roadway is in at the I-435 overpass, which actually acts as a sort of studio for local graffiti artists as well. I just love the fact that this sectional is dumped right at the bottom of the sign that says "No dumping, $1,000 fine." The sign is like a dare. It really is.
When we were doing our early research, we were just going. We saw a fire behind a fire station off of homes. Fire station,
yeah.
And there was just a giant brush pile set on fire. We went to the fire department. We were like, "What is this?"
And there was a firefighter standing outside, just watching it burn. And we were like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "We're just making sure it's not going anywhere."
And we're just like, "Well, why is there a fire right there?" And they said, "Well, some people like to rob banks in front of the police." It's like people just do this, and there's a lot of this on Blue River Road where there's an old term, cussedness, there's like a cussedness to Blue River Road. It's like if there's a sign that says no dumping, it's like that's where I'm putting my furniture.
Yeah.
So we saw that throughout the run.
Brett and I both had cameras on us as we would do tours and as we would go out there, and these are some images from my Brownie Hawkeye that I would take as we would go out there. It was just interesting because like Brent had a Polaroid which felt very sort of investigatory and would kind of interrogate the space, because you take a Polaroid of an image of something that you wanted to document. But the Brownie Hawkeye was in manufacture from 1949 until I believe it was 1961. And so it was like really a whole bunch of folks were back from fighting the war. And they and their companions decided to have a whole bunch of children. And there were a whole bunch of infrastructure that hadn't been explored yet. And they had a little bit of spending money to do so. And so they needed a camera that they could take a picture of their family in front of Hoover Dam. And the Brownie Hawkeye was that. And so I started pointing at the road, thinking, why not? Why is this any more or less valued than the Hoover Dam? And that was kind of like the inspiration between the mimicry of the National Park Service. I mean, here's a mullein growing up in the, I mean, nothing's going to stop a mullein. But, you know, and just photos of, here's the Firefighters Memorial. We actually did do limited programming as well in association with KCAI, because we didn't feel like we could really effectively, I mean, Brent and I are artists. We're not naturalists, we're not, you know, we're not memorial specialists. Brent actually is a historian, so, but like there was a lot that we felt that we were leaving out if we didn't bring in some other people. And so we actually invited, in the limited amount of programming, we actually invited a colleague of ours, Colin Rafferty, who actually wrote a series of essays about memorials and how they function and his experiences with them. They were first-person essays, really lovely works. But he actually talked about the Firefighters Memorial. And he talked about these types of memorials as kind of batteries or repositories for the need to sort of thank and remember these individuals who put their lives on the line within the nature of their jobs. But it also allows us to forget that. That we use this as a way to go, no, we thanked you, we've acknowledged your sacrifice, and now we don't have to carry the burden of that any longer. Which is why he says that it, you know, the antiseptic feeling of this particular memorial is just really interesting. Here's some more images from tours.
We don't want to bore you. How are we coming along here?
I think we're running up on it. Oh, but the tours also inspired stuff like this. People started sending me emails of their experiences along the road and just off the road, the hand-built stone walls that are in the cliff faces just above where we were doing the tours as well. So it really just was the engagement, the interest, the interactivity. That was what was so amazing to me. And it became kind of this weird exclusive club almost, that the people who kind of got it, totally got it. But then otherwise, it was almost, you know, it was almost invisible to you. Like Harry Potter's Wizarding World, but just for those who are really into fake municipal organizations.
We also spent some time kind of, as the progress of the tour moved on, we saw basically seasons change. We started paying more and more attention to kind of the natural world, which is really the appeal of the roadway itself, and really became more and more interested also in kind of how water operated on the road, and seeing sort of its both sort of destructive and also kind of regenerative capabilities, and just how these plants are putting these root systems through. But also at the same time, we kept, there was never a time on the road where we didn't interact with another person who was not part of our tour. So we would keep finding evidences of human activity. And so it just was so rich. And, you know, at the end, you know, we didn't solve the problem, and we didn't believe it was our goal or job to solve the problem. But part of what we were up to was trying to get people to think about spaces that they inhabit, and particularly the Midwest, where it's sort of a neglected landscape, or it's a landscape for people who are sort of on the inside, who are willing to, you know, take time to look at it. And the thing is it's so rich, and the thing is if you can, at a, you know, very minimal level, start appreciating something that's small, abandoned, left desolate, there's possibilities, because you can value the local really, I mean, there's new debates that basically visiting a national park is potentially destructive to national parks. You know, so there's become this new thing of that as national parks have become more and more popular and people have taken pictures of them on Instagram, it's actually starting to kill national parks. So, well, what do you do then? Well, you try to find a national park where you live. You try to see a beauty in a hardwood forest. You try to see a beauty in a freshwater creek. You try to find beauty around you, and that starts making you value things. And in the end, if you see this beautiful, that also solves the problem of, like, I don't know, dumping tires on the edge of the road or dumping tires in a creek, because you start looking like, oh, I don't want to foul my nest, I want to value it. And so that inevitably became sort of our conclusion, but while we were doing it, we wanted to give people the opportunity to behave as they would behave. Like, we saw on our final tour, we finally saw a Jeep with about, 18-inch.
Yeah, we had heard, we called them apocryphal because basically everything you heard along the roadway, people understood the roadway. But it was always apocryphal because as soon as you listened to them, as soon as you believed them wholeheartedly, something would come to just upend their story completely. And so we'd heard tales of people like popping four-wheelers over the barricade to drive along the roadway. But we had never
four-wheel
seen
drive.
Yeah,
We'd seen four-wheelers. We hadn't seen four-wheel drive.
Yeah, no, but like a four-wheel drive Jeep, like that had been elevated. We'd heard tales of that, but we had never seen it. And in the final days along the roadway, like our last tour, we're getting ready to drive away, and this person comes over, huge, jacked up four-wheel drive, like Jeep, pops the thing, flips us off, and we were like, this is the most beautiful thing. This is the best experience of all time. This is great. And on the last tour, Brent and I were just like, Blue River Road just never disappoints. It literally just never disappoints us. It is just such a weird space. But like, even the idea of, like, I just wanted to go back really quickly to the idea of a national park. As soon as you have protected lands, you've built a hierarchy. And it says that those lands are worth protecting, and this is not. This is not worthwhile. And that was one of the things that Brent and I were trying to kind of interrogate, was like, we love this space. It's hard, it's difficult, it asks a lot of us, right? And there also is this question of, like, who's legitimately responsible for that? And for just a short while, Brent and I were willing to go, I guess we are. We'll be responsible. We put up the signs. I guess we'll claim it for a little while. And then afterwards, we did put everything back kind of the way we found it. Here's the installation coming down. And then this was evidence that I had removed the sign and put it back the way I found it. Which is hilarious to see this as like, no, I put that back. And then this one is the southern entrance. And that was it.
I guess we'll do any questions.
Yeah, we'll invite Emily and Andy back up, and if any of you have any questions about any of the work that any of us do, we'll be happy to answer. Yeah?
What's next for both the Blue River Society and the Blue River Road Investigators?
Well, the Blue River Road Investigators was really Brent's and my art piece. So I think that it could be reconceived for another space, and it would be similar, a companion piece, but I really do feel like it would be another thing, if that makes sense.
Unless we get serious funding, and so that's always the exception.
Yeah, we'll pull the uniform out for serious.
But that's the thing is like, I told Trace, like, well, should we wear the uniform? But I'm like, I'm not wearing the uniform without like an honorably served patch. You know, it's like we need to. So in some ways, that phase of the piece is done, but like we're still on Instagram, we're still sort of existing, and even here is a sort of continuation of it. But we don't know what we're doing next with it exactly.
And to be honest, it feels really good to be able to talk about it outside of the piece. We were very, very specific when we were within the confines of open spaces and the performance to like live within that performance of that individual and municipal organization. So it feels pretty good to not be a part of that anymore.
So we want to try to get more people engaged, more programming like directly on the river, like the film screening we had. Also, kind of working with Emily, we've been talking about setting up some kind of unusual sort of plein air scenarios, like maybe getting a group of people with boats to, do some drawings or paintings on the river of the banks. So nothing in concrete at this moment, but seeing as we just had this nasty blizzard and things are looking a little gray, I think we're going to get back into planning mode. So unfortunately, nothing concrete to report at this time.
And
Sorry, go for it.
well, just myself, but yes, Casey Plains. I've definitely taken strides in trying to make it kind of like a painting group, but with it just being my efforts and having multiple things on my plate, I haven't really had that kind of inertia of other people wanting to be a part of it, and so I'm more than happy. I would love to hear from anyone that actually wants to go out and paint. I'm always looking for a new company. And usually on Instagram, whether it's Casey Plains or Emily Wilker on Instagram, I'm posting it within a week to a few days of me going out, and I'd love for you to come. I have a car, I have 4 spots. Come, we'll paint, have a picnic. So,
Selena.
As the investigators, did you guys have any contact with actual city people at all, or?
Yeah, a little bit. So before everything kind of got going, before the opening of open spaces, I actually ran into the road crew that kind of just works Blue River Road. And I was like, hey, can I take a picture with you guys? And he was like, yeah, but we're getting ready to break for lunch, so if you can come back in an hour. And I was like, well, that didn't fit my schedule. But I was like, I'll catch up with you guys later on, and then I never saw them again. Which is just kind of amazing. But there was a day that we had just finished a tour that this police cruiser comes flying around, like flying off the road up into the parking lot where we had parked at the 95th Street soccer fields. And the officer jumps out of the car and points to Brent and I and is like, you're the two that I want to talk to. And Brent just looks at me and is like, well, I guess we got to give him a pamphlet.
Yeah, I talked to him for probably half an hour,
actually.
And he was really interested in what we were doing. He was on patrol, so he didn't have the ability to go on a tour himself, but he was really happy that we were doing it. He thought it was great because he thought it was like kind of enhancing kind of the space and kind of, diminishing perhaps criminal activity by having us walk around and high visibility.
We saw no evidence that we had any effect on criminal activity.
That's true. But we did have an issue where it's probably back here, but we also had we did talk to Parks and Rec because we ripped off their logo. That was another thing that we did. It's way back in there, but the sort of classical tree oval, which is on many Kansas City boulevards. It's somewhere deep in there, but we made an actual official logo. So we went to sort of the archives of Parks and Rec, and they were sort of like, oh, okay, but that was about it. So mostly the official was sort of sidelined, but we did have an officer who did go pretty deep. So yeah, so that's if you know what the Kansas City Park and Rec kind of the elm tree logo looks like, it's similar to that, but that's a watercolor I painted from a photograph of Blue River Road. So if you look closely, it's got kind of like shadows and like cracks and whatnot. Again, part of the whole sort of illusion that we were, we're official yet confusing. So
yeah. Were there any? I thought I saw something. Yeah.
We were looking at Blue River in a talk a while back, and I didn't live here when it was such a popular place for people to vacation, perhaps, and to have little bungalows and things. So how does the road correspond to the old vacation homes?
From, again, a lot of stuff we got sideways, but the general sense is a lot of things were taken out due to flooding. So that there was a whole kind of, sort of residences sort of below the road, and then flooding knocked it out. And then there were also residences above on the cliff face that once they made the parkway, that sort of, I don't know, this eminent domain or whatever, that those houses left. But like the picture of the dry stone wall was probably 150 years old, was, some previous kind of, pioneer settlement. But there were also these kind of suburban dwellings up on on the cliffside, and one of the pictures we showed was sort of an abandoned driveway. So you can see evidences or echoes of other kind of roads or access points, but yeah, as far as right along that space, it's the human element in sort of in a permanent sense has been taken away. But that was my sense of the stuff that was below was basically a flood control issue. That was my understanding.
Well, and the other thing is that this would have been outside the city limits. So there were a number of like people who had like second homes south of Kansas City that during the era of Prohibition, this would become their space for making like high-grade hooch. So, that could, that those types of stories were almost a dime a dozen and almost impossible to like keep up also. Yeah, over here.
Yeah, I had one last question. So I have to ask, what is the future of the area? Why is it closed? And what's going to happen?
We're good now. And that's close. Yeah, that's good.
There we go. That is a great question, and if you find the answer to that, I can give you my email. You're more than welcome to tell me.
The Corps of Engineer issue is the one that we keep hearing. That was what I think that was what the police officer said. He mentioned the Corps of Engineers and some probably other people in here would know better as far as what their involvement is as far as the channel or flood control. So if the Corps of Engineers start getting involved on a federal level, that probably would change the river itself and then how that affects the road. The problem with the road is that the geology of it is always vulnerable, and there's various spots where what happened where we were in the annex, that could happen in other spaces as well. So there hasn't been, nobody has had the sort of political capital say like, okay, we're closing this off and turning it into a bike path, or we're going to make it back in the road. So far, everybody blames somebody else. The city blames the county blames the feds, and nobody has the funding, and so possums get to walk freely, I guess.
Yeah, it is actually a release point for rehabilitated animals from the Lakeside Nature Center, because it's a 0.7 mile stretch. So if they walk to the middle of it, and then they're kind of encased in the Blue River Parkway, so it actually is a safe spot to release wild animals, which is just weird that you're releasing a rehabilitated possum in the safest place you could, the middle of a closed down road. It's just so strange. Yeah.
So that was a stunt possum in the movie?
That was not. I mean, honestly, like,
our budget, we went over our budget very quickly. So we could not hire any possum.
The number of times that people ask us if we planted things was almost every single tour. We'd say, oh, it's been closed to motor vehicle, and then like a BMX or like a moped would come flying down the roadway, and they'd be like, did you have him like do this? And we're like, no, we couldn't afford it. But that's the beautiful thing about Blue River Road, is that it just always provided.
Yeah, it was sort of like a fake $100 city, except we didn't plan anything. It's always like it's like fire in the hole or something, and something's gonna pop up when you turn the corner. Except we never planned it. It just always happened. There was always a motorcycle or a possum or a lifted up Jeep Cherokee, just whatever. And I mean, and just it was so funny that we'd be walking, a bunch of pedestrians, all of a sudden a motorcycle comes down the road, like, everybody to your right, so we never planned it. The weirdness was always there organically and naturally, and
We did have a waiver.
Yeah, we did have a waiver, but we didn't know. We didn't know how dangerous art can be. So that was. But no one got hurt.
Yeah, one day we found what we thought was an abandoned van. The plates were off of it. It was completely like left. And in fact, one of the people who was on the tour that time said, that's going to be on fire later. That's the way they get rid of them.
It was parked right at the
right at the barricade.
So we thought,
and we were like, oh my gosh. So we're talking about it. We then take the tour on the other side of the barricade to kind of move along the roadway. And right at that time, an adult man and his 2 children come around the other side of the barricade, get in the vehicle, and drive it off. And it was just like, what just happened? In deep anger too, because they thought we
We
were
were gonna
insulting
light
their
their car on
we were
fire.
insulting their vehicle. We didn't know that it wasn't abandoned. So it's just like whenever we internalized a narrative that somebody told us, we always had something happen. We had people who we were in the middle of a tour, and someone just drove straight up the barricade, and there's signs that say 1,500 miles, 1,500 feet, closed, and the guy's like, where do I go? I'm like, no, this is a barrier. You don't go. There was a sign back there.
And then he was like, when are they going to open the road?
It's like,
Not today.
yeah, exactly. We're giving a tour. This is art. So, but it was never ending. So it was rich.
Yeah.
8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much.